Well, hello and welcome to another week of the Queensland Conservative show. I'm Lyle Shelton. Just when we think the big debates in Australian politics are settled, they come roaring back. For years, both Labor and Liberal have been in lockstep on border protection. Labor learned the hard way when last in government, allowing 50,000 people to come on boats. More than 1,200 women, children and men drowned at sea as a result of what turned out to be misplaced compassion. Thousands of children were locked up in immigration detention, and it has taken years and cost billions and billions of your money to clear the backlog. Chastened, Labor until this week supported every aspect of Operation Sovereign Borders, the tough new measures that Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison introduced when the coalition came to power in 2013. Labor even publicly supports using the Navy to turn back boats containing illegal immigrants. Sure, the left of politics had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the tough border protection measures, but pulling bodies out of the sea focused the minds, and for years there had been bipartisan support for what worked. Offshore detention is not desirable, but compared to the alternative, it is kind and it's compassionate. But suddenly, a rift between the major parties has opened thanks to the new member for Wentworth, Dr. Kerryn Phelps. Suddenly, the whole election campaign dynamics have flipped, and we are fighting an election on issues that we thought was settled long ago. Now we need to think deeply about who is driving this unsettling and this upheaval, and we need to think about the ideas that these people subscribe to. Is the green left of Australian politics, and I include the crossbenchers like Dr. Kerryn Phelps, who promote green left policy ideas at every turn, is the green left our nation's conscience, or are they using our innate desire to be compassionate and fair to achieve their political ends? Is Dr. Phelps' bill about getting sick people off Nauru, or is it about dismantling Australia's border protection regime? We got a clue when she appeared on the ABC's Q&A program last year, just after she won the Wentworth by-election. She said that she wanted kids off Nauru and that the writing was on the wall for the policy of offshore detention. Let's just think about that. Last October, her aim was undermining the policy of offshore detention, the single thing most responsible for saving the lives of people who might otherwise jump on a criminal's leaky boat. However, fast forward to this week, and Dr. Phelps is singing from a different hymn sheet so she could get support for her Medevac bill to bring illegal immigrants to Australia. She says that her Medevac bill does not in any way change Operation Sovereign Borders and that she supports Operation Sovereign Borders. She told the media this week, "It is important to understand that Operation Sovereign Borders remains in place. This proposal doesn't dilute border protection in any way," she said. Now, you can't tell the ABC in October when you enter Parliament that, quote, "the writing is on the wall for offshore detention, a key plank of Operation Sovereign Borders," and then in February say you are not trying to dilute it. And there is a big question as to whether or not Phelps' bill is even needed to help sick people who already have access to very good doctors and facilities, thanks to the Australian taxpayer. As Peter Credlin pointed out on Sky this week, the ratio of doctors to asylum seekers on Nauru and Manus is higher than what many Australians enjoy. We've spent millions on medical facilities on both islands, and hundreds of people who genuinely need medical attention have already come to Australia for that. This has always been part of the compassion our government has shown illegal immigrants in our care. We are not heartless beasts, as the Green Left would portray us, and they try to guilt us into opening up our borders. Something else is at play here. It is the dismantling of policy that works but is being done with deceit, and our innate compassion is being used as leverage. And has it ever struck you that the same compassionate moral arguments by the same people are used for redefining marriage, for teaching children that their gender is fluid, for climate change, and abortion to birth legislation? The same green left of politics chip away until first Labor capitulates on these issues and then a cohort from the Liberals follow like lemmings. It happens every time. Australia, we are being played for mugs, and that's why we need the Australian Conservatives in the Senate. We will bring back conviction and common sense. I'm Lyle Shelton, you're with the Queensland Conservative. Welcome back. Remember last year those harrowing media reports of white South African farmers being shot and tortured by violent black gangs trying to take over their land? Well, it might be out of the media spotlight now, but the problem has certainly not gone away. Like Australia, South Africa is facing an election in May, and the policies being put forward by the ruling African National Congress government further erode property rights. One of the Mitre parties has even called for the death of whites, and yet that did not stop representatives from the Australian High Commission from attending its campaign launch. I recently caught up with Arno Nel, one of the leaders of Australia's expatriate South African community. He tells how his elderly parents were brutally bashed and tortured in a violent home invasion, and he tells of his first-hand encounter with the founder of modern South Africa, Nelson Mandela. The country is sadly a million miles from this vision. Take a look.
The farmers and the white people are being tortured, or if I can say the people that are not black are being tortured. They're not just being killed. People don't just come in to their house and steal stuff and shoot them and walk out. They actually spend the time to torture them. And that is the big difference. I mean, my own parents, they weren't farmers. They were retired. They were living in Pretoria. People came into their house. My dad immediately offered them everything in the house. He said, here's the car keys, here's my money, take it and leave us alone. They still tortured them for 4 hours. They still went ahead and they were naked when they were found. My mum never could tell us what really happened. My dad never told us the whole story.
How long ago did this happen, Arno? And how old were your parents when this occurred?
That happened 4 years ago now, and they were back then about 64 years old. So they were good people. You know, my dad always taught us the sun must shine on everybody.
Now your dad since passed away as a result of the trauma of that very violent attack.
My dad developed a brain condition from the head trauma that he experienced, and he died last year. A very horrible and a very slow death.
You were telling me earlier about one of the candidates who has uttered some terrible things about killing the white farmers. He had his political campaign launch just the other day, just within the last week, and that was attended by some fairly high-up Australian officials.
The Economic Freedom Front, or Freedom Fighters, which is Julius Malema, which is very racist, very corrupt. They are out there. It's one of the things of the South African government where people are saying, why are you not stopping them from singing, kill the farmer, kill the boer, murder people, take the land? They did their election launch, and the Australian High Commissioner and the New Zealand High Commissioner had representatives at their election launch this last weekend. There is pictures being circulated in South Africa by the Economic Freedom Fighters showing these representatives with their members, and they're creating the impression that Australia and New Zealand is supporting them in this racist cause and in their murders that they're advocating, which it blows my mind that Australia, the country where I've been living for 18 years, and Australia knows what's happening in South Africa, that the High Commissioner there would still send representatives to a launch like that. In Australia, I've been here 18 years, but I'm Australian. I'm regarded as Australian. I was born in South Africa, but because I'm white, I'm regarded as a second-rate citizen. And my son is going to be Australian. So, yes, I always have hope, and we pray for South Africa, but realistically, I don't know.
Just finally, I am intrigued by the fact that you've met Nelson Mandela. Tell us what he was like and what impact and impression he left on you.
Nelson Mandela is one of those people. I never believed in an aura. People used to say, somebody's got an aura, and I said, no, it can't be. Until I met him. He's about my height, but you meet him and he feels like he's 24 foot tall, and he exudes the special character, the love for the people, the love for the country. That was Nelson Mandela. He was, I think, one of the biggest people in the world ever, with the idea to fix what was wrong, and which that made him special. He could have come out of jail and said, let's kill all the whites. And a lot of people would have said, well, we understand why he's doing it. He didn't. He opted out, and I met him. He didn't have to talk to me because I was white. He never made me feel like I was white. He made me feel like I was just the next guy in South Africa. And we had some really good discussions. And you learn from him. I learned from him that we need to look after each other. We need to forgive, but we also need to respect. That's things that I saw in his eyes and listened to him, and it's made an impact on me, and I'll always have it with me. But it also means that's why it's so tragic what is happening now in South Africa, is that it's not what he wanted.
We don't think of white people from a developed nation needing refugee status, but such is the growing dysfunction in this nation, which under Mandela promised so much. A better deal for persecuted white and coloured South Africans is something the Australian Conservatives will continue to push in the lead up to and beyond the May election. You're with Lyle Shelton on the Queensland Conservative Show. Stick around. Well, welcome back to the Queensland Conservative Show. One of the most important principles as Conservatives that we fight for is smaller government and your property rights. The right to own property and for your rights over that property to be protected is fundamental to any free society. The canary in the coal mine for property rights debate at the moment are our farmers and fishermen. The Queensland Government's ridiculous tree clearing laws, which don't even allow the freedom to clear regrowth, has farmers and graziers at the point of despair. Fishermen now have to have GPS tracking devices fitted to their boats with Big Brother watching their every move. Regulation and red tape is making their businesses very tough. If governments want to change the ground rules in ways which affect people's livelihoods, they must provide compensation. But too often, with the stroke of a red pen in Brisbane, farmers and fishermen find their livelihoods are impacted. Again, it is the usual suspects in the Green Left who drive these changes. So again, these salt-of-the-earth mainstream Australians find themselves having to take time away from their businesses to take protest action simply to be heard. I had a chat to Green Shirts leader Serena cane farmer Martin Bella outside Parliament House in Brisbane this week.
Well, property rights is the big issue for the simple fact that, it's all very well for us to say, look, agriculture needs to do this and needs to do that, but it needs to be economically viable. And it's very difficult to produce, we recognise, the cleanest and greenest in the world, but to do that with regulation that makes it very, very difficult to compete. And in actual fact, there is no compensation in any way for lost production or anything like that.
So what's going to happen then when, we're seeing court cases now, as we saw last week in New South Wales, where a coal mine has been refused because of climate change. What's going to happen when they come after the Queensland beef industry and say, let's not approve any more feedlots, or let's curb beef production because of the emissions that cattle produce?
Well, the idea that cattle produce emissions has been debunked time and time again.
Well, these people don't think that.
Exactly, because the science that suits them they use, and the science they don't they tuck aside, as we saw with Bill Burrow's research. The Slats report was tucked away in different spots because it didn't suit them the previous time, and they were found wanting there.
Now this is why we need the Australian Conservatives in the Senate, to fight for smaller government, cutting red tape and for protecting property rights. I'm Lyle Shelton, you're with the Queensland Conservative Show. Welcome back to the Queensland Conservative Show. I'm Lyle Shelton. Last week in the New South Wales Land and Environment Court, Chief Judge Brian Preston ruled against the development of a coal mine because of fears burning coal would release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This decision has sent shockwaves through the mining industry, which is our biggest export earner. Judge Preston has set a legal precedent which global warming alarmists will latch onto every time there is a new application for a coal mine. I wouldn't be surprised if legal action is launched against existing coal mines. The Morrison government tells us that our signing on to the United Nations Paris Agreement has no material impact on the Australian economy. We are told we are going to meet our emissions reduction targets in a canter, and Scott Morrison, to his credit, is refusing to give any more Australian taxpayers' money to the United Nations Global Climate Funds. We've already given billions, but at least we're starting to draw a line under this sort of nonsense. But now Judge Preston has reached into the Paris Agreement and used it as legal cover to ban a coal mine. The coal was for export and was not even going to be burned in Australia, therefore having no impact on Australia's commitments to reducing emissions. But legal precedent is a powerful thing, and no wonder the mining industry is worried. But Anastasia Palaszczuk and her Deputy Premier and Treasurer, Jackie Trad, should also be very worried. They have driven the Queensland economy to more than $80 billion in public debt, which is unsustainable, and coal tax royalties make up more than $4 billion of their much-needed income. Tens of thousands of Queenslanders are employed by the mining industry, with more to come as Adani and the China Stone mines open up in central Queensland. Put simply, Palaszczuk and Trad, as much as they are committed warming alarmists who hate coal, they can't afford to live without the Queensland coal industry. The legal leverage that allowed Judge Preston needs to be taken away urgently. Scott Morrison needs to rip up the Paris Agreement so that courts can't grab it. State governments need to pass overriding legislation that limits judges in the Land and Environment Court to land use planning and keeps them out of the politics of climate change. If these things don't happen, the economy will continue to be damaged and the livelihoods of every Queenslander will be affected. I'm Lyle Shelton. Thanks for being with the Queensland Conservative. Bye for now.